The title comes from a Philip Roth novel called American Pastoral, and there's a line in there that says what would be the opposite of the American Pastoral, and it's the indigenous American Berserk. That term, the American Berserk, I thought was like a really elegant, interesting way to talk about these undercurrents in the American dream. I wasn't thinking of the title when I made the work, but I was kind of thinking of almost like this little bit of like mania that's like running under themes. So everything's getting a little like comical and manic. Mm-hmm. But when I see, like, I feel like there's a lot of humor in the work, but I feel like pretty humorless right now.
The intersection between violence and humor in your work, like especially in those watermelon ceramics, is so undermining of a kind of power, you know, mm-hmm. like how humor plays into that.
Yeah, it's like a subversive.
It's really subversive.
Stance.
Yeah.
Like I want to laugh at everything that's going on, but it's so scary at the same time. I guess I'll just say quickly, like in terms of how the show came together. I did a residency at MacDowell, not this summer, but last summer, and I've been wanting to shift my work for a while, and so I started doing these watercolors. What I wanted to do was I was like, I'm going to make big oil paintings, like I'm going to be an oil painter now, and I started making these watercolors, thinking they'd be sketches for bigger paintings, and I'd make a couple a day, and just working through the ideas, different ideas, and thinking about still life, and then also things that are happening with the environment, with climate change, and those were kind of spurning some of these pieces. Like some of them I would drain the color of the fruit and just highlight the blacks to try to make it seem more ghostly. I was thinking about how we ripen fruit with ethylene gases now, so I was picturing like bowls of fruit surrounded by clouds, like puffs of gases, so that's why some of them look like puffs. But that also serves to erase the actual fruit, like nothing is really what it seems to be anymore. It started with the top two, which is kind of looking more closely with reference and trying to push up the vanita aspect, and using the watercolor so it starts to look moldy, a little more gothic, and then started moving down, thinking about still life's relationship to the body. So some of them are turning into body parts like the ribs. This is like a skeleton of a basket of fruit. I was thinking about some of my other ideas from the past, like thinking about clipper ships, like this is a clipper ship as a skeleton, thinking about colonialism and expansionism, and clipper ships being used for all sorts of trade, from, I don't know, tea to opium to slaves, kind of this haunted history. I was thinking like with these where the colors drained out of the fruit, like that expression when you see a ghost, the color runs from your face. Uh-huh. So almost like a haunting. And then I was thinking about with some of these floral ones turning into skeletons, almost like nature taking on a more violent aspect, like if plants started eating other plants, or things started growing almost like zombies, like fractals of bones. Barry thinks this is Donald Trump. But thinking about these thinking about Archibaldo and almost like these manic faces, like how we manipulate food, but then we also manipulate our moods too. So it's like everything's like super bright, super happy, but everything's going a little crazy. I'm pointing out some of these because all the ceramic work comes out of the watercolors. I was thinking about how nationalism is embedded in landscape painting, and I've done a lot of work in the past talking about that. So this is George Washington as if he's like a shrub or a topiary. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of, and then this is the ghost of history. Like I was looking out on the New Hampshire woods, and the groundskeeper had told me there were all these Native American ghosts because he knew I was freaked out by ghosts, so he'd tell me all these ghost stories. And I was just like kind of imagining seeing like the ghosts like going through the woods. I guess it's like a nationalistic image of George Washington on the horse kind of fading in and out.
It's interesting because I know your past work is very engaged with like landscape as a kind of national symbol of both progress and democratic ideals, right, that are associated with the history of landscape, and that landscape in the United States was a kind of like history painting. And still life too has that tradition in the United States. Still life too is seen as kind of like the most democratic of all the arts. And compared to kind of European still life, American still life was always like full and blossoming, and it represented the kind of fruits of our diversity and the blossoming of our nationalism. And what I find so interesting about these, much like your landscapes, is that literally bleeding out of all that still life had once stood for. I think one of the Art Forum critics said that your still life was like kind of bleeding out. And it's like all of that idealism, right? Just like leaking, you know? It's not a ripened juice, it's a rotting juice, you know? Now I'm getting really depressing.
I know, it's like so depressing. After I did the watercolors, I tried to make oil paintings. It didn't go anywhere, and then I thought they actually seem like they could be some sculptural ideas in here, and ceramics seem like a medium that I wanted to try just because it's in the conversation with still life. And also, like we talked about still life before, I was thinking it's also like one of the, like in the 19th century, it was like the lowest genre, like history painting, mythological painting, I don't know what
Portraiture.
The whole, it all goes down and down.
Yeah.
And still life's at the bottom, but often women would do still lives.
Right. And watercolors.
And watercolors.
And
yeah, we were
ceramics.
talking about the mediums, like maybe being traditionally women's.
Yeah.
Or in the past, so ceramics, watercolor, and then also the genre, but it's, instead of these big landscape paintings, it's a more like interior view of the home or something, because I was thinking like, what does climate change look like on our table in the home? Like, not like looking over at the ice cap. It's like a different viewpoint.
It's like domesticating this like global.
Yeah, because it's happening in our houses, in our homes on so many levels.
The intersection between like the domestic scale and these national or
Yeah.
international issues, I think is also really interesting with respect to the George Washington topiaries.
Yeah.
Because there's this paradoxical element of like, on the one hand, it looks sort of like Mount Rushmore or some big national monument. On the other hand, it's like George Washington you could have in your backyard that every person could have as part of their suburban American dream.
Right, people can like make their own sculpture in the backyard. Yeah, so those were translated into these pieces, and I guess thinking about like the smaller scale versus like what would normally be like an outdoor heroic scale bronzed piece. I made the big one first that's like cross-hatched, and I was trying to make it look like a topiary. And then as I went on, they got a little more dissolving. I was telling somebody this, I was trying to make it look like a topiary, and I come from a painting and drawing background, so I was like cross-hatching it. And I'm like, it doesn't really look like a topiary. So I Googled cartoon topiaries, because cartoonists have to reduce the mark so that you know what it is really quickly. And they use like a rounded line, so that's why I came to that pock mark. Somebody came to my opening there's like a phobia of holes, like it's like a thing. People can have a phobia of holes, and like they totally freaked out and had to, like couldn't really look at them. They were like creeping them out. But yeah, they're almost like pitted or pock marks.
Yeah, they are pitted.
Some people thought they were coral, like that mark, because a lot of my work has to do with decay in some way or mimics decay, and I think I like how these talk about decay in a different way.
Well, we talked about that in terms of just the material of ceramics, that opposed to your past work, which really is about a kind of destruction and decay, here it is this question of, is it decaying, or is it a ruin, or is it embryonic in some way? Is it forming? Is it in the state of formation?
That one reminds me a lot of that, I was saying that movie Altered States. I don't know if anybody saw that movie, where the guy's going through these different transformations from like monkey to human to old person, and it's like old school special effects, and he's like morphing. But I think, like, I've always been interested in transformation, and I feel like the ceramics maybe lends itself better to that idea than the paper mache, where it was almost more about stripping away.
Right.
And Barry likes that one with the, like, limp sword.
Barry then had a good comment about them all being kind of flaccid Washingtons.
Well, I mean, the little George Washington horse has a little pre-epic sword, but then, behind him, obviously, it's wilted and gives a sort of sense of fecklessness to the whole thing, which
I think that idea of, like, 'cause I feel that way about the clipper ships too. There's a kind of emasculating aspect, despite the materials and the kind of, you could say feminine or amateur materials of ceramics and watercolor, that there's a strength here because there's so much disempowerment of traditionally powerful imagery, right? Whether it's like Washington or a clipper ship. Like, clipper ships were not just involved in trade, they were like about American ingenuity and progress. They were the fastest ships ever. It's this pre-industrial, ability to...
High tech.
Yeah, it was high tech at the time. Yeah. And here it's stripped down and becomes totally disempowered. Its strength was the sails, right? And here we just have a shell of it, a skeleton of it. So beautiful.
This one seems like the dreams and ideals of Americana dissolving in acid rain, kind of.
Yeah.
That kind of idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, acid rain, like pockmarks.
Undoing what
it's a beautiful
America was about.
Yeah. I love that, dissolving in acid rain.
Yeah, because acid rain does like pocket the sculptures. And also like the patina, I didn't do it consciously, but it's celadon, so that's like ancient Chinese, I think it's Chinese type of glaze. So it's mimicking like that type of ceramic, but also when the bronze sculptures patina, they turn a green like that, a lot of the outdoor sculpture. I was also thinking, like when I was doing the clipper ships, that they were like these empty baskets too, like coming out of the still lifes, like this idea of plenty and bounty, and there's like nothing there. I think just, for me, I was making like little connections between different things visually too. Mm-hmm. I mean, these were fruit faces that came out of this. They were kind of the earliest pieces some of the earliest pieces I did coming out of the watercolors. And I was thinking about, again, like that manic, kind of hyper-manic mood, and as if somebody was mixing up American holiday genres all together and then was almost like carving, like not in like a manic way, so they're sort of like stabbing at it and stuffing stuff in. He's got like some marks from like the stabbing of like the knife. I just picture somebody doing it like really violently and like making this violent cornucopia. But then they have their own way of looking back, I guess, at the viewer. And then these vegetables that turn into skeletons, just playing with the body idea that what's under the surface is different through whatever genetic mutation or just metaphor or something. But
I find these to be the most terrifying. It's like this hybrid new form of like... Yeah, exactly. It just seems like this hybrid post-apocalyptic environmental nightmare form that's there.
Yeah, like Margaret Atwood.
Yeah,
right,
totally.
Has good post-apocalyptic environmental landscapes. Yeah. And they're not in the show, but I have some carrots that look like snakes that are still alive. So this might be like the aftermath, but that the food's sort of coming to life. In a more sinister way or bodily way. I was thinking of that phrase, and I don't know where it's from, like the boneyards of history, like sort of like picking through the bones. Or I just, was into making skeletons. These watermelon tongues are the very first works I did, and they were playing off a piece I made in 2012. There was a painting of a watermelon with a tongue coming out, and I was actually like making these paintings of exploded watermelons because I was just thinking of the bodily aspect of the watermelon, and you only see things exploded mostly in wartime, and thinking about Vanitas still lifes and how we see this imagery of like exploded bodies on the news from war. So I was Googling exploding watermelons to get source material, and all these news articles started coming up. And in 2012, all these watermelon crops were exploding in Mexico and China because they were sprayed with the wrong growth hormone. And the insides started growing faster than the outsides, and then they would just blow up. So that Frankensteinian idea of like messing with the food and not doing it, you know, doing it in a way that they lost, you know, all the money that was invested in the crop. So I liked the idea that the fruit was sort of pushing back on the manipulation. And so the watermelon tongues, I had done the one on the wall, and I thought, well, I'll try that. That will be my first one in ceramic, to try to take one of my pieces off the wall and make it into sculpture. So this one was the very first one, and it misfired. So the white was supposed to be dark red, and I liked it a lot better because now it looks almost more like flesh and saliva, and you know, it's like very vaginal too looking. Yeah. I remember when I made the one on the wall, I wanted it to look like really pornographic too. Like this like leering, and it's like really seductive and like but kind of repulsive. And then the rib cages came next, again sort of playing with the skeleton idea. Some of my work in 2012 at the Brooklyn Museum was using watermelons to talk about racist tropes. So thinking about that being embedded in watermelon too. And after the ribs, the teeth came, because some of the ribs were breaking and they looked like teeth, and that kind of spurned that grouping. Thinking about the racist imagery of like the black child eating the watermelon. The watermelon's like right in front of the mouth with like the teeth in it. And those images kind of stick in my head. And then I pushed up the scale to see what would happen. And I really liked that large, more abstract one too. And then with the barnacles, I was thinking about how fruit can be manipulated to stay ripe and for a very long time. So the idea that it would be in the ocean and growing barnacles, but not yet decaying. And then that one looking more like stalagmites or stalactites.
You made an interesting comment at one point, Valerie, about one of the reasons you used the watermelons was because they felt like the most human of fruits. I think alluding to having this pink fleshy interior, but then you also told me that like, well, the average watermelon weighs something that's comparable to the average human head.
Oh, did I tell you that?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember that.
So that, I mean, I think the color in these works has that, again, allusion to anatomy and vitality.
Yeah.
And maybe a hint of violence too, which
Yeah.
is, something that creeps up throughout the show.
Yeah. I definitely have been like going back and pulling things out, like the paintings on the wall above you guys. That's sort of like, those were the last things that were made, and they were kind of pulling back into older work that I made these crumpled paintings. And so I was trying to see what would happen if I translated that crumple into ceramics. And I wanted them to sort of set the backdrop of like the American landscape, or the American landscape through a distorted lens, or the artist gesture of like crumpling a piece that's a failure, and the idea of the ideal not matching up to reality or something. So that, I feel like there was like dipping back into old themes. And
that idea of crumpling up, there is like in all of your work this sense of kind of creative destruction.
Yeah.
As a theme.
Yeah. Or, because I always think of Rauschenberg's Erased de Kooning, and that idea of the gesture of erasure as a creative act, and an act of kind of moving forward in history too, like almost like killing your master or something. But yeah, I think the idea of like the destruction being an impetus for the new form somehow. But I think the ceramics seem interesting to explore for me for that reason, that I'm not like making it and breaking it like the past
No, I
work.
agree. I think it's incredibly it's like the creative is the dominant.
Yeah,
mode in
the
this.
medium kind of pushes that
Yeah.
to be more dominant.
But even the form that it takes, it's the iconography, the content of this work is very much related to, history of American art like your other work, and yet it is a completely different form. It's like moved beyond just that other, dealing with the tradition and making something really pretty original. Because this is still life, but it's really not still life.
Right.
It's actually weirdly morphing into some other kind of life. Future life.
Yeah, and maybe they imply they're going to like act back on you in this protective way. Like we were talking about vagina dentata with those. And so I couldn't remember where that came from. I just assumed from Freud. And it's like in a lot of cultures, mythology about, and they were saying it was possibly to like warn off rape and sexual abuse, to like have that fear. They have the elements to kind of protect themselves or fight back or taking on the anxieties, but they become like a shield or something.
Or evolve. It's like it's
Or
a kind of
evolve, yeah.
evolution of natural form.
There's such a striking dynamic in terms of what seemed like the gendered elements of
Yeah.
the work between what's in this room in the back and what's out front.
Yeah,
Because we're talking about these being very female in some ways, but also
powerful.
powerful.
Yeah,
Whereas in the front, we have these really male-oriented works that we have, George Washington with the
Yeah.
flaccid sword, and there is like this fabulous to it. So that I think that is a really charged element that comes out in taking the show in its entirety. That you might not get just from seeing one piece. So that's
Right.
one of the reasons I was so happy we were able to show everything
yeah, it's
Yeah.
true.
together.
Yeah, and then the couple pieces on the plinths were coming out of the watercolors too, like the still life kind of I was letting the clay do more of the work and becoming limp, and that the other one is with the color draining out, and so they felt a little more like funereal or something in the back. And then the apple cores were kind of a side note. Like one of them's supposed to look twisted, like you twist like a dish rag, like thinking about wringing every last bit out of the environment, and then kind of the stalagmite thing again.
Can you talk a little bit about picnic body? Because I think that's one of the most intriguing of the watercolors. And the more I look at it, the more I see in it.
Yeah, he's talking about a watercolor that's a picnic blanket with an arrangement of what's supposed to be like a rotting picnic in the shape of a body. But when I looked at the pictures of the exploding watermelon fields, it looked like pictures from a war field of exploded carnage. And so I was thinking about the body exploded, like the Archimboldo body, as if it was exploded in war. And because still lifes are referencing mortality anyways. So that image was sort of thinking about like just using almost like the exploded bounty, the bounty just rotting in the shape of a body on the picnic blanket.
Well, it has so much of that tension that we talked about before between like whimsy and frivolity and real violence and horror, because essentially you're looking at a crime scene is the way
Yeah, like a
I
crime
read it,
scene.
the aftermath of an act of war, but yet it's on a picnic blanket, which is supposed to be the an ultimate symbol of like domestic happiness, and the colors are all bright fruit colors,
Right.
and I think it captures that dichotomy that comes up repeatedly throughout the show.
Yeah, the berserk aspect, right?
Thank you so much for coming,
It's a
listening,
great show.
yeah,
It's really great.
talking.
Thank you for
Yeah.
doing
It
this.
was really,
Yeah, thank you so
Right.
much, all of you.